Good evening, witches, warlocks, sorcerers, adepts, friends, fans, family, and followers to Season 3, Episode 9 of the hit underground occult radio show known as Knights of the Nephilim, brought to you by Celestial Oddities Radio, bringing you 100% real and raw underground entertainment. As always, I will be your host and guide on this obscure and mysterious journey into magic and mysticism, darkness and divination. I am Reverend Frater Crow of the Coterie of SAMAEL Arcane Occult Order, and it's a pleasure to have you listening. Whether you're listening live, streaming after the fact, or you've downloaded this to your device for on the go, I do want to thank you for your patronage and support. Just make sure you click the like, share, and follow button on whatever platform you're tuning in from, whether it be iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Deezer, Spreaker, CastBox, Google Play, Amazon Podcasts, or any of the other platforms in between. We air across everywhere, so listen where you feel most comfortable, but by clicking those buttons, it moves us up the podcast community rankings, allows more people to discover the show, keeps you in the loop with new episodes as they air, and gives you unfiltered access to our past archives. And folks, there's something for absolutely everyone out there. Whether it be this show here, Knights of the Nephilim, which is based upon esoteric science, occult doctrine, and ritual magic, talking with and interviewing the biggest and best names in occultism, from ritual practitioners and toolmakers, to authors and theologians, or it be one of our other shows like Uncovering the Underground, where we talk with and interview artists from music to modeling, stars of the big screen, comedy, oddities, and everything in between. Or even our last show, The Pong, Pair of Normal Guys podcast, where we deep dive into subject matter of supernatural and paranormal phenomena, talk with and interview professionals within that field, or even do our special episodes known as Oddworld, where we take on phone calls from listeners just like you from around the world to hear your strange and unusual encounters with the paranormal. And with that being said, last week, if you missed our episode on the Paranormal Guys podcast, we did just that. We had one of our Oddworld episodes. We heard from an individual who lost both of her children sadly and unexpectedly, but had communication through the use of the medium of a Ouija board. And we talked about, was it her child getting in touch with her? Was it some type of malicious spirit contacting her, guising itself as her child? Or could it have been the traumatic experience that she had in her subconscious actually coming out and showing itself from her subconscious through the medium of the Ouija board? So we kind of got in depth of different options that could be going on there. We also heard from a caller that was calling in about multiple alien sightings and visitations over the years, and even got a written account that was sent in to us from a gentleman from Africa talking about a glitch in the Matrix where he watched the same scene in front of his eyes happen 3 times back-to-back minutes apart, as if it was almost like it was caught in repeat, and it happened again and again and again until all of a sudden it corrected itself. So always deep diving into great experiences. If you're listening out there and ever want to be a part of that, make sure you listen into our shows. That once again, that's the Pair of Normal Guys podcast through Celestial Oddities Radio. We have one more call-in episode this season in a couple weeks, and we have a couple more episodes with guests and deep diving into content, so make sure you're watching out for that. Now, this evening, you're with us on Knights of the Nephilim, and we air every other Thursday night, 8:30 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and the weeks in between is whenever the Pair of Normal Guys podcast is going on. So 50 weeks out of 52 a year, you're going to catch a radio show from us. So continue to listen in, share it around to the people that you love, and let them find out about this great content that we put out here. We would really appreciate it. We do want to thank our sponsors, Limitless Liberations, Goetic Impressions, Arsnosis, Arachne Arcane Services, The Telemancer, and Belladonna's Botanicals. Throughout this evening, we will take breaks to let you hear who these companies are, a little bit more about them, where you can check them out, and if we have any promo codes, we'll make sure we throw it out there to you. That way you have something to save yourself a little bit of money on your next order. And with the holidays coming up, folks, I suggest you buy yourself something or a loved one something from one of these great sponsors. Everything that they make is amazing, or else I wouldn't support them. So make sure you check them out. Now, as always, folks, I'm always excited to bring on guests onto the show and talk with them and get to pick their brains. And it's always people that I respect. And this evening is one that I respect pretty much more than anybody else I've brought on the show prior. I'm very excited to bring on a guest this evening who I've been following for years. I've read many of his books. I've followed his courses, listened to his teachings and his presentations that he's put out. He is not only an occultist and an author and very accomplished in both of those things, but he is also an academic and a teacher, and he dives very deep into what it is he does. And I'm very excited to get to sit with this gentleman tonight and learn a little bit more about him as a person, and to let each and every one of you hear the things that he has to say, and to bring you on to his work if you're not currently familiar. And who I'm talking about is Baal Kadmon. And Baal Kadmon is an author, occultist, and meditation teacher based out of New York City. In addition to the occult, he is a scholar of religion, philosopher, and historian specializing in ancient history, late antiquity, and medieval history. He has studied and speaks Israeli Hebrew, classical Hebrew, Ugaritic language, Arabic, Judeo-Aramaic, Syriac language, ancient Greek, and classical Latin. So that right there kind of tells you how much work he puts into what he does. Baal first discovered his occult calling when he was very young. It was only in his teens when a trip to the Middle East that had heeded the call, or that he had heeded the call. Several teachers and many decades later, he felt ready to share what he had learned. And over the last few years, Baal has helped thousands of people empower themselves with the magical knowledge and tools that they need to thrive. The key features of Baal's work are his grasp of ancient languages and his methodical approach to the topics that he writes about. This knowledge and methodology allows him to clarify and often shatter untruths and deceptions currently being propagated within the occult community. And that right there is very important, folks, because I say it all the time that just because we live in a world that everything is at your fingertips and you can access it easily, that is nice. People are learning, people are awakening more than they would have in the history. But with so many people writing about the occult, with so many people involving themselves and having opinions within the occult community, you have to sift through a lot of garbage to find those pearls of truth. But they are out there, and this gentleman is certainly one of them. So grab your ritual athames, put on your ceremonial attire, light your candles and focus your desires. Step into the circle and intone the sacred names, give offering and praise as we stare into the flames and summon the spirit that is Baal Kadmon.
What's locked behind that door?
Horror. No normal mind can imagine. Something even more terrible than you.
Now my default friend. Like all quantities, horror has its ultimate. And I'm that.
There is a horror beyond yours. And it's in there. Locked behind that door.
All right, folks, we are live this evening with Baal Kadmon. Baal, thank you so much for taking the time this evening to join us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry we had to reschedule. I was supposed to be on the show last month, but I had a big move from the to the city to out into the suburbs, and I'm all settled in, and thank you again for having me.
Oh, not a problem, and I completely understand. I recently moved myself, so, it's always a horrific time. I hate moving. It's one of my least favorite things to do, and I can understand the chaos of it, so I was completely understanding whenever you were moving, because I just had completed my move, and you were just beginning yours.
Yep.
Well,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, well, no, I'm very excited to have you on because I know that you don't normally do a whole lot of interviews. I mean, I'm not sure when the last one you had done was, but I think it was probably about 3 years ago from what I've seen. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, I've been on podcasts before, but yeah, interviews, it's been quite a while.
No, that's awesome. Well, it just shows a lot of appreciation for one another to come on this evening, so thank you. I look forward to jumping into what it is that you do, because for anybody out there that is aware, it'll be certainly a building experience from that, but anybody who's not aware of who you might be, this will be a great introduction. So why don't you start out? I like to start out kind of, old school with it and just ask the very first basic question, which is, how did you get into occultism? I know you started at a very young age, and as we kind of read in your bio, it did have to do with a trip to the Middle East and had to do with, you misbehaving as a child and getting sent over there. But why don't you tell us a little bit more about that experience and how that kind of launched the rest of your life?
Sure. Well, I mean, it started out really, I was young. I was actually really not even into that type of stuff. I was really against it. I was hardcore against all type of spirituality. And during that time, I was, running around the city, playing hooky and doing all these things. I was just completely, probably the child from hell. Actually, my mom used to call me Damien from The Omen. So after a while, that sort of caught up with me. And my father, who was born in the Middle East, more specifically, he was born in Israel. He was like, all right, and I've been to Israel many times prior to that. He said, all right, you know what? We're shipping you off. And so he shipped me off to my cousins, thinking maybe, this would somehow, get me in line, sort of tame me, so to speak. And so when I was sent there, at first I thought it was a punishment. I mean, it was just like, oh my God, they only have one television channel. They don't even have food delivery. I mean, it was during a time, that, it wasn't quite as advanced as it was like, in the States, but now it is. But back then it was not. So after a while, I got settled into school there, and they had a trip. They were taking a trip to Jerusalem. And let me tell you, the last place I wanted to go was Jerusalem. And the reason why is because I was used to the city, right? So for me, Jerusalem was old. It was like, oh, there's, stones everywhere, And so I had to go, because there you can't just cut school. If you cut school, they'll catch you, and it's not you don't want to be caught. So I go on the field trip, and we're walking through Jerusalem, and a lot of the students, my peers, I guess you could say, they didn't have the background that I had. Like they've never seen a church. Like they don't have a church down the block like I did, or a mosque just 6 blocks away. And so whenever they passed them by, they would run by as if God knows, like a monster was going to come out of them. And I sort of just slowed down and decided, let me just slow down and walk a slower pace just to see, sort of take it in. And I suddenly came in front of this chapel. I guess it was a chapel. And I looked up and I saw like the fresco, and then something came over me. I mean, it said in my mind, it was like, you are going to study this for the rest of your life.
Wow.
And this, yeah, exactly. And this is coming from a kid that had no interest in that. It didn't even believe in God. I mean, my mom told me that I would debate her, about the existence of spirituality. I mean, I was like, she said, like militant about it. And again, thus Damien, she called me. And so after that moment, things changed. Suddenly I was like, wait a minute, what is this? What is going on here? And it was from that moment on, I decided I need to study everything. I need to get my hands on everything. And because there weren't that many places there that I could study, I went to the British Embassy in Tel Aviv, and I was able to get a membership to their library. And that's where I started to see, books on witchcraft and like, mythical creatures like the banshee and all of these things. And I was like, my goodness, this is, just fascinating. And then one other thing that was very instrumental was one of my cousins, and this was very rare in Israel at the time. One of my cousins was sort of getting into Jehovah's Witness. And this was a taboo. I mean, for a Jewish family, for anyone to become Jehovah's Witness or Christian or at all was taboo. And so I would have like these secret discussions with he was sort of my uncle. He's like twice removed. And and we started to talk about Satan and things like that. And then he was like, well, if you want to see Satan in the Bible, look at open up the book of Job. And then it just sort of took off from there. And then when I went back to the States, my mom had all these occult books that I did not notice before. And then it just sort of took on a life of its own. And it's been an obsession and just something that has essentially just taken over my life for the best, for the better.
No, that's awesome, and it's amazing at the same time that you didn't think you'd ever be interested, never had a plan to, and it just not only happened, but it happened so abruptly and so profoundly. So it's very interesting. Do you think that when you heard that voice, do you think that was your higher consciousness trying to remind you, like, hey, you've already been involved into this in past lifetimes, and it's time to wake up and get back into it again?
Well, at the time, I was not that profound. I didn't even think, I just thought, I didn't even know what it was. I mean, it felt like something it was inside me, but it felt sort of outside me at the same time. And of course, because I didn't have a grasp of anything back then, I didn't know what it was. And later on in my life, as I've progressed through the teachings, then I started to figure out that maybe this was part of something that has been in me, through a past life and through, many lives. This has sort of come, and now it's sort of awakened in this current life. And, but back then I was just like, I don't know what the hell this is.
You were just going with the flow.
Going with the flow, because I didn't have the knowledge, and I'll be honest, I wasn't a particularly profound thinker as a kid. So, to me, I didn't know what it was.
Now, what were you drawn to mostly, like when you first started getting into the occult and started looking at? There's so many different avenues to go into, but back then, also, we didn't have obviously the internet to be able to just search endlessly. So you would have to find different books and then connect dots. The old school method, which I actually preferred, but where did you start out? Coming from a Jewish background, did you start out with like like the Zohar? Did you start out with the Torah? Kind of where did your path lead you from the beginning?
Well, it's interesting because when I had discussions with my cousin about the quote unquote the Satan in the book of Job, I was astounded by this. I was like, because you see, on my father's side, they're Jewish, and my mother's side, even though my mother converted to Judaism before I was born, her side is sort of Irish Roman Catholic, right? So there was already a concept of, Satan and all of these things, but I never really paid attention to it. But once I had that experience, I was very intrigued by this Satan character, in Job. And I was like, what? I couldn't believe it because, I did not read the Bible prior to that. I mean, I went to Hebrew school when I was younger, but we never read the book of Job. I mean, it they sort of kept to the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and then all these other texts like, the Passover Haggadah and, things that were more traditional. But we never came in contact with Satan, whatever that was. And so I was intrigued by that. And when I went back to New York, there was this great occult shop. Oh my goodness, I miss it. Called The Magical Child. And that was the place to go. I mean, they had everything. And so when I went there, I was like a kid in a candy shop, literally, and I would just buy everything. So I was buying witchcraft, I was buying things on Satan, everything. And that was a pivotal place for me. That really, everything that came out of that store really changed my life.
And I can understand that because so when I was younger, I was sent to Catholic school, and I would get in trouble a lot because I would oppose the ideas of what was being taught by the nuns there and by the priests there. And, one of the things that I was always enthralled with as well was the character of Satan, because they would tell us about the Genesis story, and they would tell us about, the Garden of Eden. They would tell us all this, and they would talk about the serpent coming down and, having Adam and Eve eat of the apple. And everybody would all, as very young children, oh my, they instilled the fear just like they want to. But I was the one that wasn't afraid. I was the one raising my hand saying, well, wait a second. If he was saying, not to eat, if you could have anything you want, but, you could have anything you want, but you can't have that. Why? Why would he put that temptation in front of them to begin with if he didn't want them eating it? And if eating them would give them the knowledge unto like gods, then why wouldn't he want his own children to be as knowledgeable as they could be? So I started asking these questions at a very young age, almost in the light of, well, Satan doesn't actually sound like as bad of a character as everybody's painting him to be. And I got in a lot of trouble for this. And it just led to more and more of digging as a child, but once again, wasn't an occultist by any means, just fascinated by theology. And then I remember my local library was at the other end of my block growing up. So about 15, 16 houses down from my house was the town's library. And a lot of people would take out books from the first half of that library. The back half was all the very old books that most people weren't, taking out. And I would go back there and start looking through them, and I came across this book of witchcraft, and it talked about, the witch trials, and it talked about the things that they were accusing these women of, and it talked about the torture and all of these things, but then it also talked about black magic and witchcraft. And I remember just being fascinated with this, and they wouldn't let me check it out because of the content was in it. So I know this sounds horrible out there, folks, but I stole that book, and I did return it years later. I had it for like 10 years, and then I literally took it back in one day, like incognito, and I actually put it back on the shelf. So hopefully it's still there to this day. But I did take it for a number of years, and that was a pivotal moment for me as I read about it. Something just seemed so resonant to me of like, there's a reason that I was drawn to this book, and there's a reason I'm so drawn to black magic and witchcraft and magic in general. And then it just kind of led further. When I was 14 years old, that's when I jumped into occultism, and then I never looked back. But it's just been an interesting path, and it never ends, as you and I were talking about really briefly before the show. It's only gotten deeper and deeper, and it went from that when you start out, you have that like excitement of just getting into it, but it went from that to an academic sense. And there's a lot of people who stay in that first bubble. They stay in the fact that just doing rituals fun, or I do it for earthly desires. I've only ever sought after gnosis and knowledge with my magic because it's all I've ever cared about. I don't need money. I don't need monetary gain. I want the knowledge.
Yep, exactly. And that's exactly what have I done stuff for material? Absolutely. But most of my personal practice is to bring and to open my mind to knowledge, because it's fascinating, because it's so much more valuable, because you can make money, right? You can do stuff, but this knowledge is just something that you have to cultivate. And it changes everything, it just changes your life. And it's amazing. And that's really what I think magic is most beneficial for, is to bring an opening of the mind, opening of the heart to knowledge and wisdom.
That's it, man. I mean, it's the thing is, when you start following it does something to you. People that don't understand, they can't understand. Like when you say to someone, I spend so much time reading and researching this stuff, a lot of times people look at that as it's boring, but I'm like, you don't understand how life-changing it'll be. You talk about not being happy in your life, but your answer to your problems isn't the monetary or the physical things, it's the knowledge. Because I tell everyone, first and foremost, I am a mystic before I'm a practitioner.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of people say the other way around. I'm really not into mysticism. I just worry about the practice. Well, that's great, but you're missing a massive chunk of really what's there, because the mysticism is where it's at. That's the coming into contact with the God force energy. That's the changing of your life and going through spiritual alchemy. The ritual is just being able to bring about certain manifestations and changes in life as well. But if you don't master yourself, what's the point of mastering anything else? Once you master yourself, all that just comes with it.
Well, exactly. And I completely agree with you. Mysticism is where a lot of us should be focusing. It reminds me of the quote by Meister Eckhart, a great Christian mystic. He said, the eyes the eyes that I see are something paraphrase that the same eyes that I use is the same eyes that God uses. In other words, that we are sort of one with this divine energy. The same eyes that I see from is the same eyes that God sees from. And what that really means is that when you embrace the mysticism, the power, you become you acknowledge that you are part of that when one with that. And for him to say that during that time was very heretical.
Oh, absolutely. But, the church ended up turning their back on him. Yeah, he was, he was one of the most amazing mystics of all time, I think, in my mind. He has so many, I don't know what you'd call it, I don't want to say sayings, but so many points that he'd put out that when you read them, there's just so much truth behind it. And you're like, man, this guy had some balls to be able to do this back then. And unfortunately, the church did turn their back on him. And, and as they did for so many people. I mean, they would be your friend one moment, and the next moment they'd be imprisoning you and burning you at the stake. But, he was definitely one. St. John of the Cross was another.
Absolutely.
There's so many great people in history that's seen the truth. And that's the thing is, like I said, magic is great. I love it. I love practicing. I love doing ritual. But when you can tell someone that you are God and God is you and this is all God, and they can understand the basic concept of it, but they can't understand the deeper levels. And I try to explain that to students that as you grow in consciousness, the same thing that you heard 5 months ago will have a completely different meaning and have another completely different meaning. You're peeling back the layers. And, I know in the Kabbalah, they call that the orchard because there's 4 different levels of interpretation that you can take from reading very deep texts like that.
Exactly.
And that's what it does. And I'm like, you know what? You can tell someone, hey, you are a fractal of the God force energy. And they understand that, but they don't understand it. And as you start to actually understand it, it changes everything.
Right, exactly. Because I think what happens is that you can say that to someone and they'll intellectually understand it because, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense, but to sort of feel it in, words escape me really because it's a wordless thing, experience. So, like I've felt moments where all of a sudden there are moments where there's all of a sudden things just stop and you don't exist anymore. But it's not that you don't exist, but there's no words sort of to describe that moment where all of a sudden there's unity of everything. And that's that mystical moment. And even the words, using these words is just sort of limiting that experience. But that is when you experience the mysticism as opposed to just sort of being heady about it.
And yeah, there's no way of explaining that. Like you said, it is kind of a wordless thing because I was telling someone the other day, I've had very pivotal moments in my life of just, those moments that change your life. Just as you experience them, there's no way you can ever explain it to anybody else, but they change you. But there's one moment in particular where I experienced samadhi. I experienced, the breaking of this illusion, and I became one with God. And as I did, and I've had moments like it, but nothing to the level of this. And as it happened, it changed my life forever. And as they will tell you in mysticism, all you have to do is open that door, even a slight crack, and it will not only change you right then and there, but it'll continue to change you for the rest of your life. It'll actually seep into your being, and it will change every moment going forward. Whether you're really aware of it or not, it continues to bless you from that one encounter with the God force. And it's important. That's why I try to explain to people so often. But I think that most people don't want to put that work and time in because it's not something you're going to pick up and spend 5 hours reading a book and understand. It's going to be something that you're putting 500 hours in. You're going to live, eat, and breathe it. But it'll give you back every bit of what you put in, if not tenfold.
Exactly. I had a similar experience. I actually had it on a bus. I was actually just in the city. I was going from one place to the other. I would usually take a cab or a subway. I was like, I have time. I went on the bus and then I just sort of looked out the window and boom, it just hit. Oh, wow. And I got right into that state. And it's just so what I noticed about that is, although you study it for so long and try to cultivate it, sometimes it happens randomly. It'll just happen. You can be walking and all of a sudden, boom, all of a sudden you're at one with like everything. It's such an amazing thing, but it's something that needs to be cultivated in some way, and to be, you may not need to even fully understand it, because, I don't even think the greatest mystics in the world truly understood what that is, but it is. It just is.
It just is. I mean, that is a great way of putting it, because I try to draw away from my experience ways of explaining it, and I will in a way that puts words behind it, but that is not giving you the understanding of what I experienced, because you can't. There's no way of putting it to words. It falls short, it falls flat, but it is something that everyone should experience, because it would change their life. And they even say, as the mystics will say, if you have it happen even once in your entire life, you are extremely, extremely blessed. But the aim is to try to have it happen as much as you can. But some people go their whole life and never experience it. But if you don't pick up the ball, you're never going to score. So you have to, folks, if you're listening out there, if this is something that calls out to you and you think that you want to dive into this, you're someone who is an academic type of mind, dig deeper, because as you read, you'll connect dots to other books, to other lessons, to other practices. And what will oftentimes happen is you'll read a book that will lead you to another book that will lead you to 5 more. And on that 6th book, it'll give you the keys to the first book. And you go back and you're like, oh, wow, like I all of a sudden understand concepts of this book that I completely didn't even pick up the first time. And it'll just change you. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And like I said, I always, and that's why I say at the beginning, on this journey of magic and mysticism, darkness and divination, because they go hand in hand for at least my practice, because I couldn't imagine ritual without the mystical and theoretical background behind it, nor could I vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%, because that's how my path also went, where I started sort of with books on, Satanism and witchcraft. And then that led me to Joseph Campbell. Then Joseph Campbell led me to Carl Jung. And then Carl Jung led me to Ken Wilber, who was one of my favorite American philosophers. And his is just, now he just sort of incorporates everything. So it's so important to allow that process to unfold, because some people are like, no, I can only read this, I'm not going to read that. But no, let it unflow, because one book is going to lead to the other. Because I would read stuff from Ken Wilber and then fully understand what Joseph Campbell was saying, or Carl Jung was saying. So it's very important to follow those nudges.
And I think some of the seeds that you plant have to take time to grow too. So like if you read Jung, you're not going to pick it all up first time. No. and as you're reading other things, those seeds that he planted in your brain at the onset of reading it take a little bit of time to grow. And that's what the other knowledge is doing. You're watering it, you're giving it light, and then it sprouts. And all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, I'm seeing the fruits of my work. So it's very, very important. And what did it for me is all the practices that I've looked into over the years have all been enlightening. But for me, I kept reading about other things, referring back to like, the Sephirotic tree and referring back to the 4 different manifestations of life and the Vels and everything. So I started to really dive deep, and it's something that is really the main part of my practice, which is, Kabbalism and finding out and digging deeper into books like the Sefer Yetzirah and the Sefer HaBahir changed my life. I will say a lot of other things did as well, but I will say that those works were a pivotal moment to open my mind to just a whole different understanding of cosmology and cosmogony, and like really putting it together to say, oh, wow, like this just cracked me out of this shell that I was in and really made me see a whole different way of understanding this reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kabbalah is so powerful in that way. I'm actually working, it's in process, but I'm about a third into it. I am actually working on a very comprehensive course on the Sefer Yetzirah. And I'm going to have quite a bit on that.
I seen something on your site about that. That's very exciting, because it's a pivotal work. I mean, that right in itself will change someone's life. So,
I'm actually going to read the entire text in Hebrew out loud for everyone, and then obviously the translation, and of course go into deeper into the different concepts. But you're right. I mean, those texts really change your perspective on things, change, and it deepens it in some way that you can't, it's not so easy to find that depth somewhere else. There's just something to the Kabbalah and how it explains things. I mean, it's a little opaque to the, if you're not looking, if you're not, how shall I say, motivated.
Correct.
If you're not motivated, it's going to be completely opaque. It's going to be like, what the hell are they talking about?
I can see that, yeah.
Exactly. I'm like, what is this? Why is this? and so you sort of have to start methodically. And eventually I will be releasing a massive course on Kabbalah, like from A to Z. I mean, oh my goodness, it's going to be hundreds of hours long. I mean, I've already produced some of it over the last few years, and the point of it is to bring people from A to Z in the Kabbalah and make it more understandable and practical from the source texts, and I think once people start seeing those source texts and not removing it from its Jewish core, but to realize that this applies for everyone. This is not just a Jewish thing or a Christian thing or a Hermetic thing. This is for everyone. Kabbalah is for everyone.
I do. I love that because it is for someone who isn't familiar with the terms or the understandings. It can be a lot. I mean, as you're reading it, you're like, oh wow! Like I don't know if I have the time to devote it. But just like we were saying, the further you dig, the more gems you're going to find in it. And I love the fact that you're doing a course on that because even though that's something I've practiced and studied for years, I would love to follow that as your courses are already phenomenal, and that's something we're going to touch base on here in a couple minutes. But I can only imagine the time and work you're putting into this. But as you said, even though Kabbalah, stands for tradition and something that is passed down, it isn't just something that's passed down through Jewish heritage. It should be passed down to everyone because it is so transformative to anyone that truly takes it to heart.
Absolutely. And that's sort of why I like some even though the Kabbalah Center has their own stuff, but what's good about them is although they do sort of pop culturize it just a little bit, but they make it known to people too, so people can at least read it and say, oh, let me go deeper. And then they'll go down the rabbit hole and find things that are not part of that. But I really think that it should be studied. But unfortunately, amongst many groups, they do not want to share the Kabbalah because of quote-unquote laws stating that non-Jews shouldn't be listening or reading it, or people who are under the age of 40, things like that. But we really need this information now at all ages, at all creeds. Should definitely look into the Kabbalah because there's something for everyone there.
Well, I think a big part of it is times change so much. So once upon a time when it was you had to be 40, and not only 40, but the reason you had to be 40 is because that would give you the amount of time to properly have done the research on other texts and be versed in your knowledge, to be of a mature level to handle the power of the words and the teachings that it gives you. Now, that made sense for that time period, but we live in an age where there are a lot of advances in a lot of other things, and even though you could say technology and things sometimes hurts things because it makes people, dumber in a way, there are a lot of people out there who are smart and who are ready for that knowledge and are ready at a younger age. I mean, there's people out there I know that, in the occult field that are in their early 20s that are really doing well. And, you didn't necessarily see that all the time in ancient history. So that I can understand being true to the roots, but I also understand that, as you said, we are in a time in the world right now where I think for those out there that are seeking the knowledge and ready for it, they should be given the opportunity to find it, because the higher each person's consciousness can be raised, the higher we are as a collective consciousness that can be raised, and we can make a difference in this world. And unfortunately, there's a lot of, and I'm not saying good or bad as in Satan and God people, I'm saying there's just a lot of negativeness out there that can be combated by a lot more people raising themselves to higher consciousness, because as you bring yourself up in frequency, you also affect everything around you in its frequency.
Absolutely. I'm 100% in alignment with that because it's true. I mean, we're all connected. I mean, we might be physical bodies separated from one another, at least on the surface, but we're all connected by a very deep spiritual past. Our origins are all the same, where we all come from that divine, or however you want to call it. And we're all literally one, but we are distracted by these different sort of shiny objects that make us forget, one, who we are, and two, that your neighbor, love your neighbor as yourself. You know what I mean? So I definitely agree that we should be raising our consciousness.
It reminds me of, and this is going to sound kind of abstract, but it reminds me of the Lord of the Rings story, because one of the things a lot of different things, movies and books, folks, they have lessons within them that you can find whether they meant to or not. So think about Lord of the Rings and think about Gollum. Think about how they were trying to take the ring to Mordor and to burn it and get rid of it because it was evil and they needed to bring back harmony amongst the people. But Smeagol or Gollum was so, wrapped up in the ring. He was so wrapped up in this shiny object that made him feel powerful that he would let the whole world burn just so that he could get what he desired. And that's really a pivotal thing to think about, is that's the world we live in, is there's so many people that only care about themselves and their possessions and their material items that they don't focus on the fact that all of that really at the end of the day is meaningless. But if we can all actually raise that vibration, your life will actually have everything you ever needed without maybe having any of those things, and it'll affect your life. And then as we all grow, we do really find that connection amongst one another. And that's why even some of the evil men of history, even you look at Crawley and you say, love is the law, love under will, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And you talk about love, and what's he talking about love for? And I don't understand this love thing, because as you understand what and who you truly are, and understand that we are all one being living and seeing this consciousness or this reality through billions of different eyes, but yet we are all one eye, then you understand it. And as you understand it, there's love, because your neighbor's you are your neighbor.
Absolutely.
And that's, a lot of people have a hard time understanding it. So like I said, it's one of those concepts you have to really experience it to understand it. But before we go any further, guys, we're going to play a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the courses that Baal offers, because I've taken every one that's currently up on his site, and I can tell you they're the best damn courses you're going to take from anybody. They're mind-provoking. They are deep. There is a lot of work put into them, so we'll talk about that right after these messages on Knights of the Nephilim. Knights of the Nephilim podcast would like to thank our sponsor, Arachne Arcane Services. Arachne Arcane Services is a husband and wife duo comprised of Baron and Baronessa Arachne. With over 40 years of practical experience, they are masters of the occult arts through various practices and paradigms, such as necromancy, high magic, black witchcraft, and more. They are published authors under their own publishing house, the Arcane Press. They offer books, courses, spell work, consultations, ritual tools, and more. All of their products are handmade of the highest quality material and empowered through ancient rites. If you wish to know more about them or their business, or you require their services, please feel free to contact them at ArachneArcaneServices.com. That is Arachne, ARAIGNEE, ArcaneServices.com. And if you use promo code KOTN, you will get 10% off of your overall order or purchase as a special highlight of them being a sponsor of this show. Thank you so much, guys. Knights of the Nephilim podcast would like to thank our sponsor, Goetic Impressions. Goetic Impressions is a company dedicated to the faithful creation of advanced ritual tools by following grimoire guidelines as closely and as feasibly as they can in the modern world. Follow them on Instagram, Facebook, or their website, goeticimpressions.com, to stay informed on new projects and limited-time items that they roll out frequently. For listeners of Knights of the Nephilim podcast, you can use the promo code KOTN10 for 10% off of your overall order. Again, that is KOTN10 for 10% off of your overall order. And make sure you check out their Facebook, Instagram, and website. Once again, the website is www.goeticimpressions.com. goeticimpressions.com. Again, that is goeticimpressions.com for absolutely everything for your ritual needs. Fantastic items, quality items, greatly priced, quick shipping. Can't speak highly enough about these guys. Absolutely wonderful team, and I'm glad to have partnered with them. Thanks, guys. Knights of the Nephilim podcast would like to thank our sponsor, Arsnosis. Arsnosis was formed by Diogo Cells Pimentel, an artist located in northeast of Brazil in the state of Bahia, which is the birthplace of the greatest artist in the country. Involved with occultism since 2009, starting in shamanic practices until reaching Western occultism through the paths of Luciferianism, Thelema, Goetic ceremonial magic, angelic and Enochian magic. Since 2017, he has added his art of drawing and painting to magical artifacts, putting the energy of his practice and personal research into the artistic and magical works that he creates. With the auspices of the great King Paimon that governs over all arts and sciences, you can find his work by searching Arsnosis on Facebook and Instagram. It is theurgical work channeled into magical tools made by an adept for adepts. Over time, his work has become known throughout the globe for the care and energy of the will applied to each and every piece that he creates. And with the motto that was propagated in greater proportion by Aleister Crowley, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," he applies the energy of the will of the initiatory path into each and every work. Once again, you can check him out by searching Arsnosis on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks, Diogo. All right, guys, we're back on Knights of the Nephilim radio show. We've been hanging out for the last 45 minutes with Baal Kadmon, talking about his history into occultism, talking about mysticism and the different outlets of inner illumination and how that's transformative to one's life and something that oftentimes in the current age is looked over and skipped, unfortunately, something that we need to bring back and bring those tools to the mass public so that they can grow from. So that's where we left off before the commercial break, and we started to talk a little bit about some courses that he's going to be offering coming up on an extensive understanding of the Kabbalah and also his workings of the Sefer Yetzirah, which is the Book of Formation. It's something that I suggest that every one of you out there that's interested take, because it changed my life just in general, so I can only imagine Baal's course on it. But I do want to talk a little bit about his courses. So, I will say that I've been following him for a few years now. I've read several of his books. There's an endless amount of his books, by the way. I mean, I don't know Baal, how many books do you have out at this point? Do you even know?
Oh my God. Because I took a break from writing for a while. The SAMAEL book was something that I brought back. But yeah, I mean, I have quite a few dozen that cover so many different topics, and people have asked me about that. How is it that you cover all of these topics? And it's because I feel personally that anyone who's interested in the occult or spirituality should never limit themselves to one thing. And it speaks to what we were talking about earlier about how one thing sort of leads to another. Yes. And so I decided, I didn't want to box myself in. I wanted to try everything. I wanted to do everything. And, I said in a podcast recently, not too long ago, one of my own podcasts on YouTube, someone said to me, well, if you have all of this stuff, right, do you master any of it? No. And then it reminded me of that saying, where they say, a jack of all trades is a master of none, right? But people don't read the entire saying. It's a jack of all trades is a master of none, but better than a master of one. And that's actually the entire saying. So, and I feel that that's what we, a lot of us should be okay with, is to be okay with learning different systems and being, you can master some of them, obviously, but also mastery is not always the end game. Sometimes it's using different systems can help you grow in different ways. There were times where I was very heavily focused on just mantra work, and other times where I was focused more on the invocation of demons and angels. And I think that those are different phases that are very important, and it's okay to venture off. And that's why I decided to write every, and I still have more to do on topics that I've experienced myself and other people have experienced, and that it's okay to go from mantra to then invoking a demon and being okay with it and using that to grow.
Well, you said in Pazuzu Rising, which is obviously out there if you're listening, folks, is one of his books. I love it because Pazuzu is something that's always been very important to me, an entity that is extremely powerful to work with. And you said at the beginning of that book that you have used methods across different backgrounds and diversities to bring together in a syncretic way to work with daemon spirits, and that the purists out there will spit on it and say, oh, that's not how it's supposed to be done. But as you said, the Puritans often will fade away in the history, and that there is a reason syncretic things work. That is my main method of working, is I've always pulled together mantras and mudras and breath work and visualization, trance work, hypnosis, and things that come from the East, and bring them over. And I brought over things from the Kabbalah. I brought over things from diabolism, satanic infernal rites. I mean, I've brought together elements from multi-dimensional backgrounds together in a system that works very powerful for me. But there's a lot of people that say, well, you're just so many different things into one thing. Well, that's because each one of them gives you different fruits, and you just have to know to put it together and make something great out of it. So you just said something, too, that I just said the other day to someone, so I love it. I mean, literally, it was like hearing myself say it, and I love it. So as you said, a jack of all trades is a master of none, but still is always better than a master of one. And I just said that to someone the other day. I says, but no one knows that's the full saying. I says, and that's important because it's okay to be widespread in what you're doing. It's okay to have passions in multiple areas, and there's growth there. The person who is into 10 different things avidly is more versed than the person that is the master of one specific art. And I know for me, I'm a diabolist. I've always said that I have no problem telling people I'm a devil worshiper, but it doesn't mean that I don't absolutely find love for reading the Bible, or that I don't find love in reading Kabbalistic texts. As I said, that's actually my bread and butter. And I find a lot of fruit there. I can talk about Jesus all day, folks, and I don't have a problem with it, just like you'll hear me make a video in the next couple of days telling everybody Merry Christmas. Now, there's the ooky spooky practitioners out there that'll definitely leave me comments and say, how the hell you call yourself a diabolist and you're celebrating Christmas? Because I see no problem with it. I see no problem celebrating Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ is the inner illumination and light inside of you that if you can learn to raise, you will become a God, because he said, look inside yourself and you will find me there and find yourself into the kingdom of glory. And that is because he's telling you the ropes of what to do, and there's nothing wrong with that. So why would I ever, as a practitioner, have a problem with an allegorical story that is telling you the ways to reach adepthood and godhood? So people don't see that, and you start to learn that as you connect those dots and you dive into different subjects that there's so much fruit. I mean, I'll tell you, like the Bhagavad Gita, one of the best books ever written in history.
Absolutely.
I can't read that. I've read it 15 times now, and I can't read it without each time taking something new from it that just changes me internally. So, folks, if you're listening out there, don't limit yourself by limiting yourself. Don't say that, because I work with demons or demonic spirits that I can't do X, Y, or Z. Maybe X, Y, and Z will give you some of the most powerful keys to ever work with those spirits.
Absolutely.
And that's why I appreciate you, Baal, because I see that in you. I see that we're very similar in a lot of ways, and I like that, because that is the way I find the most power out there. Because I know too many practitioners, that's not how I do it. I stick to just this. And I'm like, hey, that's great, man. If that's what you're doing, more kudos to you. But I feel like you're shutting off a lot of roads and paths that could be there for you. And you'll come across those Puritans, especially like the Goetic cats who are like, I only do the Lemegeton exactly word for word as it says. And I'm like, yeah, that just sucks, man. That sucks for you.
Well, what I perceive from a lot of the Puritans is that there's a lot of anger against, the established religions like Christianity and stuff like that. And I get it, because some people have grown up in very traumatic environments where religion was the main tool or main abusing force. So I get that. But at the same time, if people can sort of understand that there's more to it. It's like, for example, for Jesus, like you said, is a beautiful example. If people would take time to read, let's say, the Gnostic Gospels, or like the Gospel of St. Thomas,
yes,
and just read that, and it's such a beautiful thing. And you don't have to believe in Jesus. You don't have to be a Christian. You don't even have to have any type of connection to the church, but there's a lot of beautiful stuff about Jesus out there, and we can use that information to help ourselves, because people always assume Jesus was this character that's sort of like against everything that we do. But if you read some of the infancy gospels, he was not a nice kid. He was not a nice kid. In fact, some people called him a murderer, because the kids would die. If he got angry, he would kill a kid, So the thing is that actually Jesus was a lot more human and a lot more like us than we know. But because we're not looking in that direction, we don't know that. But I think studying Jesus's work through either the Gospels or the Gnostic Gospels and other related texts is a beautiful thing. It can't hurt you. It can't hurt you is basically it, but it can help you, because you can take some of that into your practice.
Well, I think it's something that I've been wanting to put out as a course, or as just like a well put together video to teaching people, is you can take two very different looks at Jesus aside from Christianity and the common history. Is you can look at it as all allegorical, and it is just simply the chemicals in your brain, the milk and the honey, the pituitary and the pineal gland secreting the oil and the honey and coming together and going past the 33 vertebrae, which is 33 when he was crucified, and it goes into the cave of Brahma in your brain, and as it emerges on the third day, because it takes 3 days to pass through it, you come into Christ consciousness. So you can take all of those meanings, which most people listening out there right now are like, what the hell is he talking about? But you can go into all of that, and that's powerful. But you can also go into the fact that if he was a real man, he probably wasn't the man that you think he was, and he was actually probably Simon Magus, and they took his story and they placed Jesus Christ over. And Simon was not a nice man. Simon was a black magic practitioner, sorcerer back in those days. And yes, he did some pretty wild stuff. And there are non-canonical books out there that talk about this man, and they talk about him doing things as powerful as raising the dead. In fact, they said when Jesus was crucified on the cross, the spirits of the dead rose from the earth, and at the mount where he was crucified, that the dead rose and were walking amongst the people. And they talk about all kinds of other things that Jesus did. And there's even correlations with him working with Beelzebub. And they say he denies it, but they say he worked with them to cast out demons, and a demon cannot cast out his own, blah, blah, blah. So you get into all that. I mean, there's a lot of things hidden there, but I think that if you want to dig into that, there's no proof that Jesus Christ as a man ever actually existed, but there is proof that Simon Magus existed.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because he kept a prostitute with him, and that's where he traveled, and she was his closest apostle, and he had apostles. Jesus Christ had apostles and kept Mary Magdalene with him, and they said that Mary Magdalene was a whore, but actually, upon further digging in, they found out that everybody messed that up, and Mary Magdalene was never the prostitute. The prostitute was Lazarus' sister who washed his feet, but time for another story. So, it's just very interesting that you can take all these other truths and the Gnostic Gospels, and like you said, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas, the Apocalypse of Adam. You get into any of those, even if you are a Christian, step outside the box. You can still believe what you already believe, but look into some alternative things, and you might just blow your own mind. Because he said, I am not who you think I am and who you've all made me to be. My Father is not who you say he is. He is not the blood-soaked faced angel, Soklos, the demiurge. I come from the land of Barbalo. So, I mean, there's some things that are said in there that you're like, wow. And these aren't texts that were written after the fact. They've dated them when they found them in the Nag Hammadi library. They date just as old as the original scriptures. So it's very, very interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of them are contemporary texts. So it's definitely worth looking into, and I think it'll expand people's horizons about and maybe even heal people that have religious trauma that was based on religion. But to see Jesus in a different light could heal them too.
And I think it's just good to puzzle your mind sometimes, because sometimes you'll read into this and it throws so much at you. They're like, well, now I didn't get any answers. In fact, I have more questions, but that is a good thing. I mean, when you read in and then you'll have the people say, well, I don't understand, the New Testament's so different than the Old Testament. And the Old Testament God seems kind of evil, and he says, I am good, I am evil, I am life, I am death, I am all these things, I am your God. And then the New Testament's all light and love. Why is that? Well, the Gnostic text will tell you because they're two different gods, that Jesus comes from a God, the original source, Ein, and that the demiurge was Yahweh, and so forth, and so whatever you want to believe. But the thing is, folks, if you're hearing this, it starts to raise these questions in yourself, which makes you dig further and read more and connect more dots. And in doing so, not only do you increase your knowledge, you increase your spirituality and your vibration, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Now, before we go much further with that, I want to say that you've done that for me, because as much as I've studied over the years, when I came across your courses, I already was reading your books, and then I'm like, oh, wow, yes, courses too. The first one I took was, and I think you had just released it just prior to that, was the 72 Demons of the Name, the left-hand pillar of the Shem Hemic Fourish angel system. And it is so extensive. And I can't even imagine the amount of time that you put into reading and researching and putting together the course, let alone recording the modules. Folks, it is 276 videos. If 144 of them are meditations, 72 with angelic names of summoning the 72 goetic demons, and then 72 without. But that's only 144. After that, you still have, however, almost 100 more of actual teachings of the history of demons and where the name came from, the history of how hell came to be a thing in Christian mythology. Just so much in this course that it'll blow your mind. No matter how advanced you are or how much of a beginner you are going to learn so much from this course, and it's only one of several. I mean, we have ancient Egypt, history, hieroglyphics and magic. We have lucid dreaming, learn to master your dreams, meditation made accessible, and then the counterpart to the one I just mentioned at the beginning, which is the 72 angels of the name of the Shem Hemic Fourish. And the two of them hand in hand, you just will sit back afterwards and say, how do I ever process this much knowledge? I actually went through both courses twice, and I plan on doing so again just because there's so much to unpack. And I love it. So kudos to you on this work. This is something so many more people need to find out about and take.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of work. I mean, we're talking about, months and months and months, and it's the same. Like I'm actually the course that I'm working on now is the ancient Mesopotamian course. It's going to be just I mean, I'm actually intimidated by it myself. It's just like there's so much work, and it takes a long time. I mean, you're sitting here, 8 hours, 10 hours. Sometimes I won't even get up for a bathroom break. I'm just like, nope, got to finish this, got to make sure. Yeah, so it's a lot of work, but it's a labor of love. I love it. Time goes by very quickly for me, and I just have to remember sometimes to get up and walk around.
You just made me have the craziest deja vu moment. I don't even know what to say about that. So I had a dream last night, I guess because I was thinking about our interview, and I had a dream last night that I was interviewing in my dream, which was strange. And we had talked about a Mesopotamia course, I shit you not. And I never seen you say anything about releasing that course. So that's phenomenal, because in the course we were talking about Marduk, and we were talking about Tiamat, and we were going deep into just the whole history breakdown of the fastening of the world. And I know that maybe it's because I listened to recently again Pazuzu Rising, and you talk a little bit about that at the beginning. Maybe it was like in my subconscious and it came forward. I don't know, but I just had a dream about that last night, so that's wild to hear.
Oh, cool. I mean, if you want to see a sample, it's actually on my YouTube channel. I have one video about a particular person who was very instrumental in our understanding of the gods of ancient Sumeria and the ancient Akkadians, she brought them together. She's an ancient. She was from ancient times, from the Akkadian Empire, and she brought them together. She's the one that we have to thank for our knowledge about Inanna and the loving embrace of Inanna, because without this one person, we probably wouldn't, with her writing, we wouldn't have what we have on the ancient gods and goddesses. And so definitely worth taking a look at. And that's one video from the upcoming course.
No, I'll be checking it out. Absolutely. Folks, if you're hearing that, check it out, because that's going to be another phenomenal course. And it just goes to further my statement that you blow my mind, because you mentioned 3 new courses between the Sefer Yetzirah and the Kabbalistic breakdown of a full expansive version of it, and now Mesopotamia. I mean, you can't really get more versed in any one of those 3 categories, and that's just 3 of what you got coming up. So you need like a whole team of workers for you at this point.
I'm thinking about at least getting someone to help me with some of the other tasks that I don't want to deal with, but the research and the recording, obviously, no one can do that for me. So
exactly. No, I love it, Mick. Kudos to you on all of that. That's great. So if you're looking out there, folks, you can go and check out all of the different courses and take them. They're very, very reasonably priced. You will be busy for hours. I can tell you the 72 Demons of the Name. I don't even know how long the course is from start to finish, but I listened to every bit of it, and it kept me captivated for quite some time. And there's several other courses, and they will teach you. I mean, like I said, I learned so much on top of what I already knew. And I love what you do with your workings of meditation and using the Hebrew names and doing it backwards. And I'm not going to say too much about that. I want people to experience it through the course, but they're very powerful.
Thank you. Yeah.
Now, let's talk about that a little bit, because I know one of the things we want to talk about tonight is, and I just read an article this week, funny enough, because we and you talked about the kind of the subject of the show a couple months ago, and I got a news letter this week from Jason Miller, another very popular author and an occultist, and he had said that he noticed a huge changing in the trends over the years, that once upon a time it seemed like all occultists that were writing or presenting or teaching, or just in general, were pulling areas from all different cultures and just slapping it together to the point where there wasn't really even a sensical reason behind it. It just like was taking from every culture you could. But the reason he brought this up was nowadays it's the complete opposite. He talks a lot in his courses, which he also runs some very, very nice courses, that people almost will question. He says one of his students put up a How Much the Sorcery of Hecate course changed their life, and they were saying about using the mantras. And I guess there was dozens of comments underneath there of people saying, why the hell are you doing mantras, or why are you doing breath work and this and that? They're like, that's Eastern magic. They're like, pick a side, and like the ignorance of people. And he says, it just blows my mind that people don't understand the power behind these things. And it went further. And folks, if you're listening out there, check out Jason as well. Shout out to him. Sorcery of Hecate course is phenomenal. I took that. It's actually, Hecate is one of my daily practices. It's my main practice of magic is Hecate and sorcery. But phenomenal courses. He has another course on Saint Cyprian. It's called the Black Skull. He has Jupiterian magic. He has a course on Purba, all kinds of great stuff out there. But, you know, it made me laugh because I was thinking about our show this evening and how we do live in a occult world right now where you have a lot of people talking about doing these amazing things in ritual, and you know half of them are bullshit. And they're talking about these amazing depths that they reached with invoking spirits or evoking spirits. And when you talk to them about mantras or mudras or trance work or meditation, I don't really do any of that shit.
Right.
And you're like, wait, what? You're like, how do you talk to any spirit if you haven't mastered trance work and if you haven't dug into your mind in deeper levels of meditation? Like, answer me that. And I try to be nice and I smile when I talk to a lot of other people, but when you hear certain things, it's an automatic red flag. So I would love for you, for your perspective, to tell the listeners out there really where mantras come in, and also meditation in general, but why it is such an important step in ritual magic.
Sure. And before we do that, I would like to say Jason Miller is a very deep thinker and one of the pillars of our community. Definitely recommend his stuff as well.
Absolutely.
I think that, because a lot of people don't like to use mantras because, they have associations with it, or they just don't understand what they are. But mantras are very powerful. I mean, they're not just words that people are just repeating, right? I mean, people are like, oh, you're just sort of repeating these words. But these are words and letters of power. And mantras don't just exist in Hinduism. Of course, we have them across many different religions. You may not call them mantras in other religions, but they are very powerful because, one, they create an atmosphere, aside from their spiritual power, that what they represent, they also create a pattern in the mind, in the brain, that puts you in the state that you are looking to achieve. So a repetitive sound, a repetitive word, just a simple word. Some people can say just like God a million times, God, 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 and it'll put them into a state. So there's a few different ways to approach it. So definitely, because these words are ancient, especially the Hindu mantras are ancient. They have, and sometimes we don't even know what they truly mean, but they resonate. They have sort of a sacred sound that belongs to the universe, to the primordial power that has created this universe. And so when people recite mantras, they are tapping into that, or they possibly can be tapping into that, depending upon their practice. And I think it goes hand in hand with meditation, because in the world that we live in, as you mentioned, there's a lot of shiny objects. We're distracted by so many things, and we don't realize that a lot of our own issues come from our mind. We're not disciplined with our thinking. We perceive that we do not have control over our thinking. Whereas meditation allows you to slow down, to observe your thinking instead of experiencing it in this visceral way, saying, oh my God, I'm so anxious, I'm so this or that. Whereas in meditation, it allows you to still experience it, but to sort of in some way detach from it so you can see it and see what it is, because a lot of our thoughts, they go away. When we sit with them, they go away. They lessen. And so I think meditation and mantra chanting for spirituality and for the more practical side of just easing the mind, creating a sacred mental state is very important. And I mean, I couldn't imagine not having a mantra practice or a meditation practice, because it changes everything. It can completely revolutionize your life. And I mean, they have studies, little biological studies, real studies show that what happens to people's brains when they meditate, their brains actually improve. They actually see the physical changes that occur in the brain. It actually, some people that are advanced in age, but because they meditated, a lot of them have the brain of a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, in the sense that they can make quick connections. That meditation has helped them. So it's a very broad topic, but it's very important.
I agree with everything you said. I mean, the funny thing I find about people who don't spend enough time meditating, and it's the exact reason that they should, is one of the first things that they'll say is, oh, I try to meditate, but I can't get there. It's so hard. Well, if it's hard, that's the very thing that you should be focusing on, because that means it's an obstacle. And if you're not aiming to break barriers, then why are you in the occult and into a practice at all? I mean, that's the point, is to break barriers and break bounds. And that is going to be one of the hardest things. And it seems like so often, I think it's human nature to want to rush to the finish line without being good at running. Like, I'm so worried about getting to the finish line, but I don't want to train. Well, if you trained, that's, like I've said so many times on the show before, is everyone wants to get to the top of the mountain because they think that that's the end. But what they don't realize is the prize isn't the finish line. The prize was the journey up the mountain.
Absolutely.
And when you take time to look around, you appreciate it. meditation is going to be hard. It's going to be one of the toughest things you've done. To learn to silence the monkey mind, to learn to silence all mind. And as other great teachers will say, is there's different types of meditation. And they are all meditation. I won't take from them. But meditation really isn't affirmation meditations, which it can be, assuring yourself of something or programming your mind for something different. It isn't, walk through meditations of walk past a beautiful creek and sit on a stone chair and there's birds around you. That's good as well. These all do things for your mind. But regular meditation, mystic meditation is doing what we talked about earlier between the two of us, is tapping into that mystic state, that God force state, where you're going to come to connection, if doing it properly, with the God force. You will come to a point where your body will vanish, your thoughts will vanish, and you are something beyond that. You are not the body, you are not the mind, you are the ever-present Spirit of God. And when you tap into that, it will change you. So those things are important as a prerequisite to ritual or just life, because as you do it in the morning, you feel more energized and happy and clear throughout the day. You're not getting stressed by the little things in life. You're not getting angry or upset. You have a clear mind and you live a great day, or have a great day. You do it at night before bed, you sleep better. You feel better. It'll change the way you eat. It'll change the way you live. If you have a good daily practice, you'll start changing bad habits in your life. Maybe you don't want to smoke that cigarette anymore. Maybe you don't want to even drink anymore. I know through complex meditation, for a period of time there, I gave up eating meat. I didn't drink alcohol. I didn't do anything. I became, I lived a very ascetic life. People were like looking at me like, are you trying to be a monk or something? I'm like, I might be. And I've relaxed a little bit on some of those things, but it'll start to really change, like I said before, your vibration. Now, with mantras, it's so powerful. I mean, you can feel it in your body as you're saying it, and you feel it change. You feel it change the vibration. And as you said, not only the spiritual level, but the physical level. And even Christians, folks, there are sects of Christians and Gnostic Christians in history who would repeat a prayer over and over and over again, endlessly. They would do it for hours on end until the world would vanish, they'd say. And that's what I'm talking about. When the world vanishes, or the Toltec shamans would talk about, in Carlos Castaneda's books, they talked about silencing the world or stealing the world. That's what they were talking about, is that moment when it all vanishes and it's just you and God. But it's not even just you and God, it's just God. And it's an amazing thing. And that should be a prerequisite, folks, to your ritual. And if you're not doing those things, you're missing out on something, because if you can fully meditate and clear everything and ground and center yourself, you can go into a ritual focused. You can raise those vibrations. You can raise the Kundalini energy or the chakra energy. You're going to tap in and have a much better experience. Now, I'm not saying you can't summon a spirit and still have a feeling of it coming into the room. You might still have great concepts that come into your mind. You might still have a great experience, and a lot of people are doing this right now, and they're sitting here staring at the candles and saying, how do I have a more powerful experience? But then the same people won't take the steps to have a more powerful experience. It takes work. You have to go to the gym before you step into the ring, and that's the way that it is. So I beg you out there, folks, if you are trying to progress your practice, start to work on mantras and mudras and breath work and trance work and meditation. You want to know one of the hardest things to do, guys? Breath work. Sit for 25 minutes and do the fourfold breath technique. Just 4 in, hold for 4, 4 out, hold for 4, 4 in. Do that for 20 minutes straight without messing it up, and just focus on that, because by just focusing on the breath, the rest of everything else disappears. That'll be ways of training yourself to get to those deeper levels of meditation. But it's brutal. It is one of the hardest things you've ever done, and all you're literally doing is sitting quiet and still and breathing. And you would think that would be just second nature to us, but it's actually brutal, and that means that is something you need to work on. So thank you for sharing your input on that, Baal. I love that. I just hope more people will understand it, because I think there's so much, as you said, even in your bio, there's so much misconception, and so many people that call themselves occultists, or they'll say, I'm an adept, and meanwhile, they're an adept of absolutely nothing. And they just are people with opinions who have read a book.
Right, and they're reactive, reactive and angry, and that's, I don't know, it's unfortunate.
It is, because like I said, just like the people who only want to work one path and never even be willing to read outside of that or step outside of that, you're just missing out on. You don't have to ever adopt another practice, but by knowing what other people practice, it gives you insight that'll strengthen your own.
Absolutely. And that's why it's always great. Read as much as you can, and just go as deep as you want, but don't ignore any path. You may not resonate with a particular path, but you could still learn it because it could give you some insight. Absolutely.
I'm a book junkie. I can't stop reading. It's a problem.
Yeah, me too.
My nightstand's got like 40 books on it. I'm constantly flipping in between them. Sometimes I'm reading 6 books at once, and my wife will be like, how the hell are you reading all these different books at one time? I'm like, because sometimes you just have to jump to a different one because you just need to know. You get so antsy, like, oh, what are they going to say next? What am I going to learn next in this section? Most of it's very old works. I don't read a lot of modern stuff, but you were one of the ones I read. I'll tell you, I do read Jason as well. So funny that I mentioned him earlier, but there are a few, like you said, that are pillars within the community that I read. But there's just so much misconception that I see put out there that I guess it all has its place because you're going to have the people that might have to fail before they triumph. So they're going to read some stuff that doesn't work or doesn't make sense or it's bullshit, and then it will eventually lead them to the good stuff. Hopefully, some people will be lost in it, which every generation has to have, I guess. But I just noticed with the advent of modern media and social media and all of that everyone can write a book, and I see people writing books that should never, ever, ever write a book.
Right.
I stress that heavily. Yeah. Now, talking about that, one of the last things I wanted to talk about before we wrap up for the evening is your newest book, which is SAMAEL, A History, which I found to be amazing because I have someone, as I said, since a very early age had been drawn to Satan and been drawn to SAMAEL, and I always, from the very beginning, looked at SAMAEL as being Satan. Some people will argue that, but to me, it's just clear cut. You put out a book that pretty much shows that 1,000,000 times over, from the old passages to different concepts and in 1,000,000 different ways, piecing together the lore and the history, and I loved it. And then at the end of it, you give practices that are very powerful as well. So why don't you tell the listeners out there a little bit of an overview kind of this book and how it came together and what kind of inspired you to do it, and just let them know about it.
Sure. Well, I've always been interested in SAMAEL because it was just he was a character that always popped up in the Kabbalah. I mean, he's all over the Kabbalah, but I also noticed that he was in the Gnostic texts as well. And over the years, people were mentioning different things about SAMAEL, and they weren't. I found that there wasn't a lot of depth to it. Like, they were just quoting like one thing, and there was a lot of misconception about SAMAEL. So I decided, let me just create a book, write it, and show that actually SAMAEL is a very deep character. There's information out there that obviously a lot of people don't know because the texts are sort of obscure, or they're not translated into English, but they're like in Hebrew or Aramaic. So I brought a lot of that together in this book, and pretty much, as you said, if there's any character that would be Satan, it's SAMAEL. I mean, SAMAEL is the Satan. I mean, everyone else, Belial, all of those, Azazel, and all of those may even be aspects of SAMAEL. So he's definitely he is the god of the left-hand path. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, that's pretty much it. Yes. And even in the Gnostic Gospels, he might be the god of the Old Testament. So he's a very powerful but also underrated figure. But when you see his actual history, you'll see that he's been behind so many things that you don't know about because they don't really mention him by name until you dig deeper into these texts. And so my book really goes into quite a bit of depth on SAMAEL, how he's related or not related, for that matter, to the quote-unquote fallen angels and the Watchers, because there's actually 2 separate falls, and how he's related to actually the very first murder in the Bible, essentially, but it's sort of outside the Bible a little bit, and that the person that was murdered wasn't Abel, but SAMAEL's own child. And so these are stories that most people don't know about. So I thought, you know what, let me bring it all together And that's how SAMAEL history came to be. And so many people have emailed me. They were like, "Oh my God, I didn't know all of this stuff." And so I really, it was a labor of love. I loved writing it, and I hope people really benefit from it, because there's really a lot there that most people probably have never even heard of.
Oh, there is. I got to be honest with you. I have always been very fond, and I even established an order, the Coterie of SAMAEL, which is based specifically on infernal magic, and obviously our patron would be SAMAEL. And it's been very enlightening when I got your book, because some of the things that you've said I've thought and no one else has ever said, and it kind of affirmed it. There's things that I definitely have never heard of before. So like even studying very obscure texts, I've come across some awesome stories before, but when you said about the first murder in the Garden of Eden, I'd never heard that before, and that just peeled my whole wig back. Like I'm like, wait, what? And very, very interesting. And you talk about the wrestling with Job and everything else that you talk about, and I'm like, man, obviously you did a deep dive into your homework, as you always do with everything, but I loved it. I loved seeing that. You talk about how the Bible code, you can connect him to other pieces. That I thought was very interesting. That's a whole subject in itself is the biblical code, and how there's so much, not only the different layers of exegesis of digging deeper and deeper and deeper, but like when you start to get into the code aspect, it's hard to even fathom how that's even possible that someone wrote that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I'm always astounded whenever I look through it. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that. Yeah.
Like, and they say it was truly channeled from God. Well, it might have been, because I don't understand how else someone could have done that much work to connect so many pieces. But I loved the book, and I just think that it's something that if you're out there, folks, you are interested in Satanism, you're interested in SAMAEL, you're interested in just the left-hand path, as Baal said, the chieftain of the left-hand path is SAMAEL. Even so, if you look at Satan being SAMAEL, even look at the Klipothic tree at the top, you have Satan and Moloch. You have SAMAEL and Moloch. You have SAMAEL has his own sphere, with a Dramalek is the governor of. So he's shown time and time again he's everywhere, and there's a lot of amazing things said throughout the old biblical and Hebrew texts, and how they make comparisons to things. But when you look at the Book of Enoch, for example, when you go to some Gnostic style text, they talk about how he is so huge in appearance that it would take 500 years to scale his height.
Right.
When have you ever heard of any other being in any other text ever mentioned to be such a monstrosity, so large, so powerful, and he's covered with millions and millions of eyes, and made Moses shudder and fear and tremble and beg God that when his time comes to not let SAMAEL come and take him? That right there is such a powerful, powerful section of a book for it to say that. And I'm glad that you covered that, because I always thought that from the first time I read, the Book of Enoch, that I'm like, wow, Moses is trembling underneath the power of Satan, because he's terrified of him. Exactly.
Yeah, that's the amazing power of SAMAEL. And these are things that people just don't know about. But he is, if you were to believe the Gnostic text, he's actually the creator of everything.
Yeah, he's the God of this world.
He's the God of this world. Yeah, and he's the God of the Old Testament. So that's even so it's interesting that the Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and other religions that derive from it are essentially demiurgic in nature.
Yeah, they all stem, because everything. Yeah. If you look at it that way, everything has come from him. So even people that are like shunning the devil, you don't realize that you were made from the devil, and you technically, without realizing, are worshiping the devil.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Wild thing. Something to ponder on out there, folks. But no, this has been a phenomenal episode, Baal. I thank you so much for coming on. Anything else you would like to tell the listeners out there? Obviously, we already covered a shit ton of stuff that you got coming up, but anything else you got project-wise coming up for them to look out for, and also where they can check out your work?
Thank you. I'm working on the Mesopotamia course pretty actively right now. But if they want to look at my other courses, you can go to occultcourses.com, and all my main courses are there. There is a special release that I only sent to my mailing list and a few other people. It's a meditation. It's very quick for the angel Metatron, and that can be found at occultcourses.com/meta. And you can find it there. It's a very limited edition. It's actually gonna, in 10 more days, it's actually not going to be available anymore. I worked on it with Chawan Ku, who was a good friend of mine, and that's something to look out for if you're interested in the angel Metatron. But really, the main course that's coming out is definitely the ancient Mesopotamian one, and I'm actively working on that.
No, that's awesome. And I did see on the mailing list, you did mention the Metatron course, and I'm like, oh, I wanted to do it, but I got so much other stuff I'm working on right now, and I'm like, no, Crows, take a step back. I know it's powerful, but I'm like, you can't force everything in at one time and not have proper time for each thing. And how ironic, we were just talking about the Book of Enoch. For anybody out there that doesn't know about Metatron is Enoch raised to angelic form. He's the governor of the angels. And, all together, that's another great story to look in, all that you can about Enoch, and how Enoch is also associated with Hermes Trismegistus, and how it's connected to so many other things. If there's one thing you take away from tonight, folks, it's connection. As you dig, you will make more and more connections. So make sure you check out his courses on his website, and jump into one. It's worth it. I promise you. If you go into one of them wholeheartedly and you don't like it, message me and let me know, because I would love to hear why, because I don't think I'm getting a message from anybody. It's brilliant. I promise you that, folks. Other than that, I want to give you a little bit of insight on who's coming up. We have a couple more episodes before the wrapping up of Season 3. Our next episode will be on the 29th of December, and let me make sure I'm not messing that up. No, 29th of December. We had a couple people moved around. And funny enough, so Baal, you had moved and had to change the episode around. The following week, or the following guest, was supposed to be Harold Roth, and he had to do the same thing because he's moving. So he is supposed to be coming up on the 29th, and that should still be taking place. I will check with Natasha. And real quick, I would like to give a shout out to Natasha Sarver, who is our creative director. She helps run all 3 radio shows, book the guests, take care of the marketing and promotion. So much love to her, and thank you so much for all the work that you do. I'm pretty sure, if I got it right, that on the 29th we will have Harold Roth on. We will be talking about The Sword of Moses, which is a very powerful book. He recently retranslated it. There was translations in the past which were very sketchy. They were definitely translated wrong. He has since retranslated it, and it's pretty good. I read about half of it, and it's not a practice that I personally would put into effect, because I can't say 900 names back to back to back. That takes a lot of dedication to memorize that. But it looks to be a very, very powerful work. And he also put out a book a few years back about herbs and witchcraft, and he goes in depth about how to cultivate these herbs, when to use them. It's very powerful also. So we'll be having him on, and then we will be bringing on another guest that I am very, very, very excited for, which is Frater Barabbas. And this man has created ways of doing ritual magic that I've never seen anyone talk about or do, and it's very quantum physics style, and I love that because that's a big topic for me. And he talks about how to create vortices and vortexes and use those in magic for summoning spirits. So we'll be talking deeply about that. But what he really wanted to talk about was the Nephilim and what he believes they were, and a little bit more about the lore that he says most people don't know about. So I'm very excited because I want to learn some things about it. So make sure you tune into those episodes. And we had one more episode. We don't have a guest booked. Things got moved around, as I said, so we'll see who that final spot of the season will be. But other than that, guys, thank you all so much out there for listening in. Share it around. Click the like, share, and follow button. If you have any suggestions or want to get in contact with me, I don't have social media, so you can never really reach me in any way other than celestialoddities@gmail.com. Again, that's celestialoddities@gmail.com. I will always answer your emails, or you can reach out to Natasha, who is our creative director. She runs the Celestial Oddities Radio Facebook and Instagram page, and she's on there every day working that. So if you ever have any questions, you can reach out to her as well. Other than that, Baal, once again, thank you so much for coming on and letting me pick your brain this evening, talking to the listeners out there and teaching them some things. And I hope that you have a wonderful and safe holidays coming up.
Thank you, you too, and thank you so much for having me. I'm honored.
Absolutely. Thank you again. And folks listening out there, we're going to finish with the last 3 commercial breaks for our sponsors, and we'll fade out for the evening. Much love to you. Be safe out there, and have a great holiday, folks. We'll see you next time on Knights of the Nephilim. Knights of the Nephilim podcast would like to thank our sponsor, Belladonna's Botanicals. Belladonna's Botanicals is owned by Jennifer Vatsa, a left-hand path and poison path witch, certified aromatherapist, herbalist, perfumer, skincare formulator, and incense crafter who designs and has created a massive product line consisting of over 300 products, with new ones being released every month. Belladonna's Botanicals provides high-quality, handcrafted metaphysical and self-care products, including flying ointments and oils, herbal tinctures and elixirs, herbal smoke blends, ritual oils, powders, incense, radionically charged crystals, ritual bath products, fragrances, and bath and body products. Jennifer draws inspiration from the spirits she works with, and they often have requests. Anecdotally adding that as she was creating her product lines for the dark goddesses and demonic gatekeepers, that King Paimon showed up requesting his own product line as well. She often directly channels what they would like to be included in their products, in addition to her own ritual workings along with known correspondences. She also has a popular left-hand path-oriented YouTube channel where she posts content on everything from podcasts with other occultists to her gnosis from working with different spirits and various topics pertaining to her craft and creations. You can check out her product line at www.belladonnasbotanicals.com. Again, that is belladonnasbotanicals.com. Or check out her videos on YouTube by searching her name, Jennifer Vatsa. That is V-A-T-Z-A. Thanks, Jen. Knights of the Nephilim podcast would like to thank our sponsor, Limitless Liberation. I'll read you about this wonderful company from their owner, Elena. Limitless Liberation was inspired by both Lucifer and Belial. Lucifer has been with me most of my life, as far back as I could remember. Belial and I started to work when I was going through a very difficult part of my life. He completely turned mine and my family's life around for the better in a very short period of time. In return, he asked me to create what he called Charger for him. He showed me the designs, so I created the first Charger for Belial, and Lucifer wanted one next. From there, I had spirits lining up with requests for magical items. Some are control freaks, while others just inspire. They are all so individually different, but every single item created has power within it. Each item operates on many levels. They operate as an anchor for the spirit you're working with, thus aiding easier connection between the two of you. They also operate like a power cell or battery, where they already come with an inherent energy to them, but they become stronger as you feed them and pull from them during ritual, as well as to strengthen your workings. Limitless Liberation continues to grow to honor the spirits that we love to work and build relationships with. You can check her shop out at etsy.com/shop/Limitless Liberation. Again, that is etsy.com/shop/Limitless Liberation. Knights of the Nephilim podcast would like to thank our sponsor, The Telemancer. Let me first tell you a little bit about their owner, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about them. James Hunter Ralston has been a member of the Order of the Voltec, starting in 2008 and progressing through several degrees, last serving as head of the Outer Order. The Order of the Voltec is an offshoot of a pylon of the Temple of Set, originated to study and practice several forms of the sorceress methods centering on techniques used by Mexican and other Central American priests and magicians. Many of the techniques involved were popularized in the late 1970s and 80s by Carlos Castaneda. Over the decades since his first experience with magic, his desire has grown into the creation and use of what other shamanic sorcerers term as power objects, talismans, amulets, totems, and other powerful objects. His interests expanded to the degree that he chose to become an apprentice of several Appalachia's premier craftspeople and learn the art of metalcraft to produce power objects for both himself and select patrons. He does work with gold, pewter, silver, and sometimes other metals as well. He has been doing this for over 8 years. He does create talismans, pendants, rings, altarpieces, and more, almost all exclusively by custom commission. And you can check out his stunning work at facebook.com/thetelemancer1. Again, that is facebook.com/thetelemancer1. All as one word. Thank you so much.